I'm the daughter they call to fix the furnace on Christmas Eve, the one who stops the pipes from bursting. I'm the emergency contact. But this Thanksgiving, my sister, the lifestyle guru, decided my blue-collar appearance would embarrass her wealthy new boyfriend. So, my mother called, her voice tight, to tell me I wasn't welcome at the table. My name is Avery Bright. I am 31 years old. I am a commercial electrician, and I co-own a small, union-affiliated electrical company here in Riverton, New York. Riverton is one of those old industrial cities on the Hudson, all rust and brick, trying hard to look cool and modern as it moves into the 21st century. They're replacing old factories with glass condos and artisanal breweries along the waterfront. I'm the one who runs the heavy-gauge wire that keeps the lights on in those new condos. I'm what you'd call steady. I'm quiet. My sense of humor is dry. So dry most people miss it, which is fine by me. I'm the kind of woman who has everyone else's emergency contact numbers and blood types memorized, just in case. I'm also, reliably, the one standing just outside the frame in every family photograph, usually because I was the one who had to climb on a chair to fix the light fixture, or reset the router, so they could take the picture in the first place. I'm the one who gets cut out of the crop. Just this morning, I was 20 stories up, harnessed to a beam, staring at a junction box that looked like spaghetti had a violent argument with a live current. Some rookie on the drywall crew had sliced through a conduit, creating a dangerous short that could have shut the whole site down, or worse, fried someone. The architect, a kid who couldn't have been older than 25, was vibrating next to me in his spotless, brand-new work boots. "Is it bad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Can we fix it? The client is visiting at noon." "Avery, noon?" I didn't look at him. I looked at the tangle of scorched copper. "It's not good, kid," I said, my voice calm as I pulled my insulated cutters. "But it's just wire. It only does what you tell it to." I walked back to the panel, killed the main feed, and put my personal lock on the box. Then I began the slow, careful, methodical process of untangling the mess, splicing, and rerouting the load. The kid was sweating through his pristine polo. I was just working. An hour later, the lights were on, the system was safe, and the site foreman, a tough old guy named Sal, just nodded once. "Nice catch, Bright?" That's the thing, on site, with the crew, with my union brothers and sisters. I'm Bright. I'm the expert. I'm the one they trust not to get them killed. The respect is quiet, but it's solid as a steel I-beam. Then I go to my parents' house, and that respect evaporates. It's not that they're malicious, it's that I'm not visible. I'm functional. I'm the appliance that talks. My sister, Lila Mercer, is visible. Lila is 28 and lives in Newbury, the wealthy suburb nearby where the lawns are aggressively green and the coffee costs $9. Lila is a rising PR star, which, as far as I can tell, means she's a lifestyle influencer. Her world is beige. Her Instagram feed is a meticulously curated masterpiece of beige sweaters, beige lattes, beige minimalist furniture, and candid photos that took 3 hours to stage. She specializes in photos of brunch, paired with captions about living authentically that sound like they were stolen from a decorative throw pillow. And every Thanksgiving, the pattern is the same. I get to my parents' house at 9 a.m. Why? Because the thermostat is acting funny again, which means it's 20 years old and needs to be reset, or the garbage disposal is jammed, or the kitchen breaker keeps tripping because my mother has plugged 3 slow cookers, the electric carving knife, and her antique toaster into one overloaded circuit. I spend the morning with my tools, kneeling on the linoleum or digging around in the dark, dusty breaker box, getting the house operational for the holiday. Lila breezes in around 2 p.m., looking perfect. She brings a pie, usually from that expensive bakery in Newbury that has a 3-week waiting list. She sets it on the counter, and my mother inevitably clasps her hands together and says, "Oh, Lila, you shouldn't have. It looks homemade." And Lila just smiles her soft, curated smile and says, Only the best for my family. I'm usually washing grease and spiderwebs off my hands in the utility sink when this happens. This year, the call came early. It was a week before Thanksgiving. I was at the supply house in Riverton, double-checking an invoice for three-phase conduit. The air smelled like dust, PVC, and new copper. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mom?" I answered, bracing myself. "Hey, what's broken already?" There was a pause, then her voice. "Avery, honey, how are you?" I stopped. I stopped dead in the aisle. My mother's voice was wrong. It was high, it was strained, and it was polite. My mother is never polite to me. She's familiar, demanding, abrupt. Politeness meant she was performing. "I'm fine, Mom. What's up?" "Well," she said, drawing the word out like she was pulling taffy. "We're just doing a small thing this year. Just very small. Very intimate." I leaned against a pallet of industrial-grade light fixtures. "Small? Mom, you invited Aunt Nadia's entire bowling league last year." "Yes, well," she cleared her throat, a nervous little sound. "Lila is bringing her new boyfriend home, to meet us, for the first time." I waited. Lila always had a new boyfriend. "And Avery, this one he's important. His family is well, they're significant people. It's a big deal. Honey, we need to impress them." I still didn't see where this was going. I stared at a spool of armored cable. "Okay, so? Do you need me to come over and check the wiring on the dining room chandelier? I told you that dimmer switch is faulty." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. It was so complete, I could hear the high-pitched hum of the fluorescent lights in the warehouse. "Avery," she finally said, and the brittle politeness was gone, replaced by a strained, apologetic whisper that was somehow much, much worse. "Lila is just worried." "Worried about what? That the pie isn't really homemade?" "Please don't be difficult," she snapped, then immediately softened. "She's worried that, well, your job and your appearance." My hand tightened on the phone, the hard plastic case digging into my palm. "She just thinks, with his family being who they are, that your work is very physical, and your hands, Avery, they're calloused. That whole blue-collar, working. Look, she's just afraid it will be embarrassing." Embarrassing. The word didn't compute. It just hung in the air, buzzing worse than the lights above me. I felt a sudden, sharp, burning heat behind my eyes. My throat closed up, as if I'd swallowed a handful of drywall dust. I looked down at my own hands. They were, in fact, calloused. They were stained with wire lube from the morning's job, and there was a fresh cut across the knuckle. They were hands that worked, hands that had fixed every single thing in her house for the last 15 years. "Embarrassing," I repeated, but my voice was just air. "Sss." My mother rushed on, sensing the silence, desperate to fill it. "We just thought, maybe this one time, you could, sit this one out. We'll do something for Christmas. Just us, okay?" I swallowed. I focused on the spool of armored cable in front of me. I counted the ridges in the metal casing. 1, 2, 3. "I understand," I said. My voice was completely flat. It was the same voice I used on the high-rise when the architect was panicking. The voice of steady, functional, reliable Avery. My mother flooded the line with her relief. The sound was gushing. "Oh, thank you, honey. I knew you'd be the mature one. You always understand. You're so good. You're so grown up about these things." Being excluded, being called an embarrassment, and for my compliance. I was rewarded with praise. I was good. I was mature. "I have to go. Mom, the foreman is signaling me." A lie. "Of course, honey. Of course. We'll talk soon. We love you." I hung up. I didn't move. I just stood there in the middle of aisle 4, ladders and cables, at the Riverton electrical supply. The forklift beeped in the distance. A guy from another crew walked past and nodded. "Bright?" I nodded back. The ground beneath my steel-toed boots felt like it was shifting, like the concrete slab was suddenly unstable. I paid for the conduit, signed the invoice with a pen chained to the counter, and walked out to my truck. I sat in the cab for a long time, the engine off, just staring at the dash. And I realized this wasn't just a random insult. This wasn't a mistake, or a one-time lapse in judgment from Lila. This was the bill finally coming due. This was the ultimate confirmation of something I had always known in my bones but never dared to name. In my family, I wasn't the daughter. Lila was the daughter. I was the infrastructure. I was the fuse box. I was the emergency backup system. And this year, for the big event, they had decided they didn't need the backup. They just wanted the pretty facade. And I, Avery Bright, was not part of the facade. Sitting in that truck, surrounded by the smell of new plastic and metal, the warehouse scene just dissolved. It was replaced by the smell of our old house in Riverton. The one we lived in before my parents stretched themselves thin to get a better address closer to Newbury. That first house always smelled like damp wood, dust, and ozone from the ancient knob and tube wiring that probably should have burned the place down a dozen times. It was a house built on my father's empty promises. The porch steps were soft with rot. "I'm gonna fix that next weekend," he'd say, every weekend, for about 5 years. The kitchen faucet dripped a constant, maddening plink into a stained porcelain sink. My mother would sigh about it, and my dad would just turn the TV up louder. Lila was the one they polished. She was the face of the Mercer family. She got the ballet classes, the new Easter dresses that I was told were too frivolous for me, the shiny patent leather shoes that were always front and center in our family photos. The hallway in that old house was a shrine to her. Perfect attendance. Student of the month, a blue ribbon for a diorama she'd made. My mother kept them all under glass. I was useful. The moment it crystallized, the exact second, I was 11 years old. Mr. Henderson from 3 doors down, a retired electrician who seemed ancient to me, was on his knees in his living room, swearing at a wall socket. It was black and melted looking, smelling like burnt plastic. I was there to drop off mail that had been delivered to us by mistake. "Don't touch that, girl," he grunted, yanking a screwdriver. "This outlet's gone to hell." I just stood there, and I watched. He was trying to pigtail a new wire onto the old, brittle one, but his hands were shaky, and he was connecting the hot to the neutral. "That's wrong," I said. He froze. "What did you say?" "You're crossing the circuit," I said, pointing. "The black wire is the hot. It has to go to the brass screw. The white one is the neutral. It goes to the silver. You're going to short the whole breaker if you do that." "Mr. Henderson stared at me, then at the wires, then back at me. He hadn't just taught me a new word. I just knew. I could see the logic. I could see the flow of the current in my head. Like a map. It made a perfect, clean kind of sense that nothing else in my life, not school, not my family, ever did. He handed me the wire strippers. "Show me. Smarty pants?" I did. I stripped the new wire, made a clean hook, and showed him how to secure it properly, making sure no stray copper was visible. We installed the new outlet, and when he went to the basement to flip the breaker back on, the lamp he plugged in clicked on, bright and steady. He gave me $5. I ran home, holding that $5 bill like it was a medal. I found my dad in the backyard, staring at the broken porch step. "Dad, Mr. Henderson's outlet was on fire, and I knew how to fix it. He said I saw the logic. He gave me $5. My dad looked at the bill, then at me. I was covered in dust from kneeling on Mr. Henderson's carpet. My fingernails were black, and I probably had a smudge on my face. He put his big, soft hand on my head, the hand that was always about to fix something. He let out a short laugh. "Well, what do you know?" He looked me over, and his smile became something else, something pitying. "You're not pretty like your sister," he said, like he was stating a simple fact, like the sky is blue. "But you're useful, damn useful." The word pretty had never really applied to me. I already knew that. but the word useful landed like a punch, wrapping itself around that $5 bill. It was a compliment that felt like a bruise. It set the terms of my existence in that family. Lila would be the art. I would be the appliance. That Thanksgiving, the one when I was in 8th grade, was the real test. My mother was in a full-blown panic. The house was full of aunts and uncles, the air thick with perfume and the smell of roasting turkey. Or it was supposed to be. The oven was dead, cold. "Frank!" my mother shrieked at my dad. "The oven is dead. The turkey is raw. They're all here." My dad, predictably, opened the oven door, stared at the raw, pale bird as if looking at it would cook it, and then went to the breaker box. We heard a clunk, then another. Nothing. "The breaker won't reset," he yelled, his voice echoing from the basement. "It's shot." "What do you mean it's shot? Can't you fix it?" "My God. Frank, it's Thanksgiving." I slipped away from the living room, where Lila was showing off her new velvet dress to our cousins. I went down to the dark, musty basement. My dad was just staring at the panel, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "It's the main fuse for the kitchen, Dad," I said quietly. "It's busted, Avery. The whole holiday is busted." I looked at the old fuse box. It wasn't the breaker. It was an old cartridge fuse, one that had probably been there since 1950. It had finally burned out. "Did you check the spare?" I asked. "What spare?" I pointed to the small, metal-cased fuse taped to the inside of the panel door, right next to a faded, handwritten label. I had put it there myself, last summer, after I found a box of them at a yard sale. I pulled the main disconnect, killing power to the whole house. Upstairs, the cousins all groaned as the football game went black. I carefully pulled out the hot, dead cartridge fuse with a pair of insulated pliers I'd bought with my own money, slotted the new one in, and closed the main disconnect. The lights and the TV clicked back on. A cheer went up from the living room. A few minutes later, the smell of roasting turkey slowly, blessedly, started to fill the house again. My mom kissed my dad's cheek. "You saved the day, Frank!" My dad, to his credit, just grunted and pointed a thumb at me, standing on the basement stairs, covered in dust. It was Avery, the useful one. And that was it. The job was mine. I was the crisis manager, the fixer, the secret spine that held the whole rickety structure together. My mother, obsessed with what the neighbors thought, needed the illusion of a perfect, functioning home. My father, chronically irresponsible and allergic to actual labor, needed someone to clean up his messes and fulfill his empty promises. I became their shared, unspoken solution. When I was a senior in high school, my guidance counselor, Mr. Tate, called me in. He had my aptitude scores. "Avery," he said, leaning over his desk, genuinely excited. "These are off the charts. Your spatial reasoning, your logical processing. Have you ever thought about electrical engineering? With these scores, you could get into a top program, Cornell, RPI." I felt a spark, something bright and hot. "Engineering? You could design power grids, Avery. You could build the future." I took the brochures home. I left them on the kitchen table. That night, I heard my parents talking, their voices low, in the living room. "Engineering?" my mother said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "That's for men. Besides, we can't afford that." "We can maybe afford one," my dad said, "and the college money has to be for the one with real potential, the one who's going places." He meant Lila, who wanted to go to a private liberal arts college to study communications, which seemed to involve mostly just talking. I was standing in the hallway, and I felt that old bruise, the useful one, ache. I quietly picked the brochures up off the table and put them in the recycling. Lila got the private college. The day after I graduated high school, I walked into the local IBEW Union Hall and signed up for the apprenticeship. "It's just temporary," I told myself, "just to make good money while Lila gets her degree." But temporary became permanent. The apprenticeship became a journeyman's license, The license became my own company, and all the while, the family workload only grew. It wasn't just the oven anymore, it was me, 22 years old, on their roof in a rainstorm, patching a leak because my dad didn't like heights, and my mom couldn't have the neighbors see the water stains. It was me, 25, patching the drywall in Lila's first apartment because she'd accidentally put her fist through it during a fight with a boyfriend. It was me, 28, co-signing a loan to replace their ancient furnace, using my own business credit, because theirs was shot and they were 2 months behind on the mortgage. "What would we do without you, Avery?" my mother would say, patting my arm, never once asking what I wanted. It was me, last year, paying an overdue utility bill for them, quietly, so the power wouldn't be shut off. The final straw, though I didn't see it at the time, was 2 months ago. I was at their house, exhausted after a 10-hour day, cooking dinner for all of us because my mom was just too stressed to cook. I was making my grandmother's recipe for lasagna, the one I had actually memorized. Lila was there, phone in hand, snapping photos of the bubbling pan. "This looks so rustic," she'd said. The next day, the photo was on her Instagram, the beige-filtered lasagna. The caption read, "Nothing better than a quiet night at home. So blessed to have my mom's famous recipe to keep me grounded. Family authentic mom's cooking." I saw the post while I was on my lunch break, sitting in my truck. I had been doing the dishes, just out of frame, when she took that picture. Now, sitting in that same truck outside the supply house, the phone call with my mother replayed in my head. Embarrassing, blue collar, calloused hands. Sit this one out. I looked back on the last decade, more than 10 years. I had treated my family home like any other job site, a never-ending renovation project. But on a real job, you get paid, you get a work order, you get thanked. At the end, you get to step back and look at the finished, beautiful, safe building and say, "I did that." With my family, I was only ever called when something was broken. I was the tool they kept in the basement, and they were embarrassed to be seen with me in the living room. I finally understood, in the Mercer family. Being the understanding one, the mature one, was just a pretty name for being the one who would silently carry the weight, fix the damage, and then accept being shoved back into the toolbox when the important guests arrived. The days leading up to Thanksgiving crawled by, heavy and gray. I looked at the calendar in my kitchen, the one from the Union Hall with pictures of turbines and bridges. Thursday, November 23rd, was just a blank, empty square. At first, that square felt like a locked door, a dark room I'd been shoved out of. The cold sting of rejection, of embarrassing, was a constant, low-grade hum in the back of my skull. But after a few days, the feeling started to change. The emptiness of that square didn't just feel like a rejection. It felt like space. It was a day with no obligations, no broken appliances to fix, no overloaded circuits to reset. It was a 12-hour block of time that was, for the first time in my adult life, completely and totally mine, an open circuit, waiting for a load. I was at the corner coffee shop near my current job site, the Riverton Grind, trying to get the taste of drywall dust out of my mouth with a cup of burnt coffee. I was just sitting at the counter, reading the specs for a new panel install. In the booth behind me, 2 older women, regulars by the way the barista knew their names, were complaining. "Well, Margaret, it's just me and the television again," one said, her voice raspy. "Don is in Seattle with his new wife's family, and the grandkids, they just don't travel. Too expensive." "I know, dear," the other replied, sighing. "My daughter's in Phoenix. She sent me a gift basket, full of cactuses. What am I supposed to do with a cactus? It's just another Thursday. I'll just have a can of soup." I sat there, staring at a schematic, but I wasn't seeing it. I heard their loneliness, and it was so practical, so undramatic. It wasn't the stinging, personal shame I was feeling. It was a simple, hollow fact. They were alone. And my own feeling of isolation suddenly shifted. It wasn't a spotlight on me, the family reject. It was a connection. I thought of all the other people on the edges, the ones who didn't fit into the perfect, curated Instagram posts. I thought of Ms. Evans, the director at the women's shelter I'd helped rewire last year. I'd been there late one night, and she'd been sighing over a schedule, telling me she'd pulled the short straw and had to work Thanksgiving Day. I thought of Maria, a single mom in an apartment building I'd serviced. I'd gone on an emergency call at 2 a.m. because the outlet for her son's breathing machine had shorted out. She was terrified, holding her sleeping kid, and I had sat with her for an hour after I fixed it, just to make sure the breaker held. I thought of old Mr. Petrov, the elderly man in my neighborhood whose boiler I'd fixed last winter for the cost of parts, after I found him huddled in his living room in 3 sweaters. And I thought of my apprentice, Jake. He was 19, a good kid, but quiet. His whole family was in Ohio. He was living in a tiny studio apartment, and I knew for a fact his idea of a holiday meal was probably a frozen pizza and a 2-liter bottle of soda. The idea sparked, clean and bright as an arc. If I wasn't invited to a table, I would build one. Literally, I'm a builder. That's what I do. I pulled out my phone and called the owner of the old warehouse our company used for storage. "Sal," I said, "it's Avery Bright. I need a favor." "Bright," he grunted. "What did you break?" "Nothing yet. Listen, the big open space in the back of the 3rd Street warehouse. Is anyone using it on Thursday?" "It's Thanksgiving, Avery. It's a concrete box. Who cares?" "I need to borrow it, just for the day. In exchange," I said, "I'll finally fix that entire bank of emergency lighting on the loading dock, the one that's been on the fritz for 6 months. I'll rerun the conduit and replace the battery packs, on my own time." There was a pause. "You'll do the whole bank? Not just the one?" "The whole bank, certified and up to code." "Deal," he said. "Just don't burn the place down, and clean up after yourself." The next 2 days, I had a mission. I went to the discount grocery store, the one with the flickering sign out front. I pushed a rattling cart through the aisles, past the perfect families buying 1 turkey and a small can of cranberry sauce. I loaded my cart up, 3 20-pound frozen turkeys, 2 10-pound bags of potatoes, cans of cranberry sauce, dozens of them, boxes of stuffing, bags of onions, jars of gravy. Then I went to the paper goods aisle, paper plates, paper cups, plastic forks. Then I went to the supply house, but I wasn't in the conduit aisle. I was buying 3 heavy-duty, 100-foot extension cords, 4 industrial-grade power strips with surge protection, and 5 boxes of cheap, warm white string lights. That night, I sent out a text. It was simple. I sent it to Ms. Evans, to Maria, to Mr. Petrov, and to Jake. "Hey, it's Avery Bright. If you don't have a place to be this Thanksgiving, I'm hosting a thing. It's at the old warehouse on 3rd and Industrial. It's nothing fancy, but it'll be warm and there will be a lot of food. 4 p.m. Let me know." Thanksgiving morning. I was at the warehouse at 6 a.m. The air was frigid and smelled like cold concrete, machine oil, and old dust. This was my kind of decorating. I didn't have beige linen. I had gaffer's tape. I ran my extension cords from the main box, taping them down to the concrete floor every 2 feet, creating a safe, flat pathway. No one was tripping on my job site. I set up 4 folding tables, not for eating, but for power. I plugged in my power strips and created a bank of outlets, a row of slow cookers I'd brought from my own apartment, and the ones I'd asked Ms. Evans and Maria to bring. This was my kitchen. For atmosphere, I threw some old, clean canvas drop cloths over the harsh overhead industrial lights, diffusing the glare into a softer, warmer glow. Then, I took the string lights and ran them, crisscrossing the room between the steel support beams, plugging them into a separate circuit. I pulled out a dozen 8-foot folding tables and lined them up, end to end, creating one long, massive table. I covered it in a cheap, plastic red and white checkered tablecloth. By 3:30, the turkeys were roasted, the potatoes were mashed, and the warehouse was filled with the smell of a real holiday. At 4 o'clock, they started to arrive, hesitant, peeking in the big metal door like they had the wrong address. Ms. Evans came first, holding a massive tin of macaroni and cheese. "Avery," she said, looking at the glowing lights. You did all this?" "Glad you made it, Ms. Evans," I said, taking the dish. "Plug-in station is over on the wall. Help yourself to a drink." Mr. Petrov came next, holding a bottle of sparkling cider. "Is not fancy," he apologized. "It's perfect. Mr. Petrov, thank you." Maria arrived with her 2 kids, a boy and a girl, who stared at the huge concrete room with wide eyes. Maria was holding a tray of tamales. "I didn't know what to bring. Avery, They smell amazing. Maria, go, get the kids a plate." Jake, my apprentice, was the last one. He looked awkward, his hands shoved in his pockets, holding a 2-liter bottle of soda. "Hey, boss, this is weird, right?" "It's dinner, Jake," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Go make yourself useful. Help Mr. Petrov figure out that cider." Slowly, the cavernous room filled with sound, the hum of the space heaters I'd set up, the sound of plates and forks, and then chatter. Mr. Petrov was telling Jake a long story about his first car. Ms. Evans and Maria were comparing notes on their kids. Maria's 2 children, realizing they were in a giant, open space, started a game of tag between the steel beams. Someone put a phone in a metal bucket, and quiet Motown music started playing. Maria's oldest son, a shy 12-year-old named Leo, the one I'd shown how to check an outlet, came up to me. "Ms. Bright, I know how to use a long knife. My uncle taught me. Can I help cut the turkey?" I handed him the electric carving knife I'd brought. "You're on, Leo, but you check the cord for frays first." He nodded seriously, inspecting the cord before plugging it in, and I felt a smile, a real one, pull at my mouth. I stepped back, grabbing a paper cup of cider, and just watched. The sting of my family's rejection was still there, a dull ache in my chest. I thought of their quiet, beige dining room, the polished silver, the strained, polite conversation, the important boyfriend. Then I looked at this giant, dusty room, lit by $20 string lights. It was loud. It was messy. Maria's kids were now laughing, a little too loud, but no one was performing, no one was on edge, no one was embarrassing. Here, my work wasn't a liability. It was the reason we were all here. My calloused hands were the ones that had strung the lights that made the room glow. My knowledge of circuits was the reason all the food was hot. The music was playing, and everyone was safe. I watched Leo carefully show his little sister how to plug in the coffee maker, telling her to make sure your hands are dry, like Ms. Avery said. This was real. This was more authentic than anything Lila had ever posted. I was standing there, under the cheap lights, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew what it was. The timing was too perfect. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. A notification from Instagram. Lila Mercer just posted a photo. I opened it. There it was. A perfect, golden-lit shot of a masterpiece of a table. Crystal glasses, real china, a floral centerpiece. Lila was smiling, her arm linked with a handsome guy in a cashmere sweater. The caption, I was sure, was about gratitude and blessings and family. I stared at the perfect, sterile, beautiful picture. From the table behind me, I heard a huge burst of laughter. Mr. Petrov had spilled some cider, and Jake was trying to clean it up, and they were both laughing like maniacs. I looked at the phone, then I looked at the table. I hit the power button, plunging Lila's perfect family into darkness. I turned the phone over, screen down, and slid it back into my pocket. I walked back toward the noise and picked up a paper plate. I chose to stay with the light and the laughter. Right in front of me, the warehouse. Thanksgiving had been a success. I'd gone home exhausted, my back aching from hauling folding tables, but my head was quiet. It was a good kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a long, productive day on a job site that went well. I fell asleep in my work clothes, not even bothering to set an alarm. I was woken up the next morning, not by an alarm, but by pounding. Someone was banging on my apartment door. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't a hope you're awake tap. It was a rapid, angry, repetitive thump, thump, thump that was meant to be an invasion. It was a family knock, the kind of knock that says, "We own this door and the person behind it, and we don't care if you're sleeping, or busy, or not decent." I stumbled out of bed, my head thick with sleep, grabbing the sweatshirt I'd left on my desk chair. The pounding came again, louder. "Avery, open this door. We know you're in there." My mother's voice, and it wasn't the strained, polite voice from the phone. It was the shrill, angry one. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, blinking against the hallway light. And there they were, the Holy Trinity. My mother, her face a mask of pinched fury. My father, standing just behind her, looking sheepish and angry at the same time. His hands shoved in the pockets of his good trousers from yesterday. Lila, her face pale and puffy, wearing an expensive-looking cream-colored coat. Her mascara was, in fact, smudged, running in thin gray lines from the corners of her eyes. And next to her, looking profoundly out of place, was a man. He was tall, wearing a beautifully tailored overcoat, his hair perfect. He looked sharp, intelligent, and deeply uncomfortable. This had to be him. This had to be Graham Alden, the important boyfriend. Before I could say hello or what the hell, my mother pushed past me, into my small apartment. My dad and Lila followed in her wake, like debris being sucked into a vacuum. Graham lingered in the doorway, his eyes meeting mine for just a second with an expression I couldn't read. "I cannot believe you," my mother spat, whirling on me. My apartment is small. She was only 2 feet away. "I cannot believe your nerve." I just stood there, my hand still on the doorknob. Graham quietly stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "You know what I'm talking about," she shrieked. "You ran right to your grandmother, didn't you? You just had to play the victim." "She told Grandma?" Lila gasped, her voice thick with tears. "Avery, how could you?" "I didn't talk to Grandma," I said, my voice coming out rough from sleep. "Don't you lie to us," my father barked, finally finding his voice. "We were humiliated. Your grandmother calls yesterday, right in the middle of dessert, and asks, in front of everyone, in front of Graham, she asks, 'Where is Avery? Why isn't Avery here? We had to sit there and lie. You made us look like monsters.'" Lila stepped forward, her hands clenched. "You always do this. You always have to make it a drama. You couldn't just be mature. You had to call Grandma and start a war. You are so manipulative. I just wanted one elegant day, one beautiful holiday without plaster dust and your work boots all over the place." The words plaster dust and work boots hung in the air, a direct echo of embarrassing. I looked past her. "Graham, right?" I said to the man. He nodded, looking surprised I was speaking to him. "Graham Alden? Yes. And you must be Avery." "You're the reason I'm an embarrassment," I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a flat statement of fact. Lila reeled back as if I'd slapped her. "Avery, he is my guest." "And I'm your sister," I said. The whole time they were shouting. I could feel Graham's eyes on me, but he wasn't looking at my face. He was scanning my apartment. It's not much. It's clean. It's organized. But it's the apartment of an electrician. On the wall by my desk, there isn't art. There's a framed copy of my master electrician's license. There's an OSHA safety regulations poster. There's a calendar from my union local, the IBEW. On my desk, next to a stack of invoices, was my laptop. Open to a technical schematic I'd been reviewing, I was still wearing the sweatshirt from my company. Bright electric, with the logo, a clean, sharp lightning bolt, on the chest. I looked down at my own hands, the ones that had been called out as calloused. They were... And Graham was seeing all of it. He was taking in the union poster, the license, the logo on my shirt, the state of my hands, the work boots by the door. He was quiet, his expression analytical, like he was putting pieces together. Then, that moment happened. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He tilted his head, as if trying to place me in a different context. Avery Bright, he said, slowly. The name sounded different in his mouth. He wasn't saying it to me. He was testing it. Wait a minute. The room, which had been vibrating with my family's anger, went completely, suddenly, stone-cold silent. "You're that Avery Bright?" he asked. My family was frozen. Lila, my mother, my father, they all stared at him, confused. I was confused. "I'm the only Avery Bright I know," I said. I was braced for another insult. That Avery Bright? The one who wears work boots? The one who smells like copper and PVC? "Avery Bright," he said again, and this time there was a strange, new energy in his voice, excitement, disbelief. "From Riverton, Bright Electric." "That's me," I said, wary. He just stared at me for a second, and then he let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a laugh of genuine, stunned surprise. "Lila," he said, turning to my sister, who looked completely bewildered. You never told me your sister was the Avery Bright." "What are you talking about, Graham?" Lila asked, her voice small. "My God," Graham said, his focus entirely on me now, ignoring my family. "I work in risk assessment, infrastructure investment. We analyze high-value commercial properties, and we look for points of failure." He took a step toward me, his eyes lit with a kind of professional zeal. "There is a case study that we've been passing around my firm for the last 6 months. It's about the Hudson Valley Galleria project. About 3 years ago, the new wing. The investors were pushing to open by Black Friday, cutting corners everywhere. The electrical contractor, a non-union outfit, signed off on a system that was dangerously under-specced. They'd run aluminum wire instead of copper to save money and hadn't used the right junction boxes." He was talking to me, but also, for the first time, to the room. "The whole thing was a disaster waiting to happen," he continued, his voice gaining speed. "A massive fire risk, but the subcontractor signed off. The general contractor signed off. The only thing standing between them and a grand opening was the final municipal inspection, which they thought was a rubber stamp. Except the city inspector got sick, so they had to call in an independent third-party master electrician to review and sign." He pointed at me. "That was you." I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I remember that job. It was a nightmare. "You," Graham said, "refused to sign. You wrote a 20-page technical report, on your own time, detailing every single code violation, every point of failure, every single fire risk. The general contractor threatened to sue you. The developers, according to the legend, offered you a bonus. I heard it was $10,000, in cash, to just overlook it and sign the papers." "It was 20,000, I said, my voice quiet. Graham's eyes widened. 20? My God. And you turned it down. You filed your report not just with the contractor, but with the city, the state, and the fire marshal's office. You blew the whistle." He looked around at my family, who were staring at him, their mouths open. "Your report, your memo, was one of the clearest, most concise, most brilliant pieces of risk analysis I have ever read. You didn't just list the problems. You detailed the precise financial and human life cost of each failure point. You saved that mall from becoming a headline. You probably saved dozens of lives." He turned back to me, and the look on his face was one I had never, ever seen directed at me. Not in this context. It wasn't pity. It wasn't dismissal. It was awe. It was profound, unadulterated respect. "We use your case study," he said, "as the gold standard example of ethical resistance in the face of financial pressure. I've been quoting your name in presentations to our new associates for months. Avery Bright of Riverton. The electrician who wouldn't sign. The silence in my apartment was so thick I could have cut it with my wire strippers. My mother, finally processing that this was not an insult but a compliment, tried to pivot. She let out a high-pitched, artificial laugh. Well, isn't that something? Just the internet, blowing things up. Our Avery, always so thorough. She tried to wave it away. She's always been good at, connecting wires. Ma'am, Graham said, his voice polite but cold as steel. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were still on me. This wasn't about connecting wires. This was about integrity. What she did was draw the bright, unfucking breakable line between public safety and catastrophic disaster. I can't believe I'm actually meeting you. And then I saw it. Lila. Her face, which had been pale with anger, was now bright, blotchy red. A deep, humiliating flush crept up from the collar of her cream-colored coat. The man she had tried so hard to impress, the important man from the significant family, was standing in my tiny, dusty apartment, fangirling over the very sister she had deemed embarrassing, the sister she had hidden, the sister whose calloused hands were, at this exact moment, being viewed as a badge of honor by the man she wanted. The entire power dynamic of the room, of our entire family, had just been rewired. The breaker had tripped, the main had been thrown, and the current was now flowing in a completely different direction. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I just stood there, in my company sweatshirt and my calloused hands, and I let him talk. I just stood there and listened as this stranger, this important man, told my family who I was. And my parents looked at me, not like I was their daughter, not like I was their appliance. They looked at me like I was a complete stranger, a stranger they had just been introduced to, a stranger they had misjudged, profoundly, for 31 years. The moment of stunned admiration hung in the air, thick and strange, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. My family, seeing their narrative of embarrassing Avery completely demolished, did what they always do. They pivoted. If I wasn't an embarrassment, I was a resource. If I was suddenly valuable in the eyes of this important man, then that value was theirs to be exploited. It was my father who spoke first, clearing his throat and trying to sound hearty, as if he'd been in on this all along. Well, that's our Avery. Always thorough, like your mother said. He put his arm on my mother's shoulder, a united front. And modest, never says a word about it, but that's a good girl, right? He turned to me, his smile all fake charm. Speaking of that, Avery, now that you're here, and we're all here, that outlet in the dining room, the one you fixed last time, it's shorting out again. I think it's sparking. And the main breaker for the kitchen tripped twice during dinner yesterday. Lila almost dropped the turkey. Scared us all half to death. He chuckled, as if this was a shared, amusing memory. And there's just a tiny water stain on the living room ceiling. I'm sure it's nothing, but maybe you could just peek your head in the attic before Christmas. Just take a look. We'd all sleep better. He was listing chores. After I'd been uninvited for being a blue-collar embarrassment, he was now standing in my apartment, in front of the man I was an embarrassment to, and listing the free labor I owed them. Before I could even process this, my mother jumped in. Her target, as always, being my wallet. And Frank, she said, patting his chest, don't forget, we need to talk to Avery about the new furniture. She turned to me, her voice sweet and reasonable. Honey, the couch is it's falling apart, and with Lila bringing people like Graham around, well, we need to present a united front. You're the stable one. Avery, you've got your business. You're doing so well. All this ethical stuff. She said the word ethical, like it was a brand name. We just thought you could contribute, help us out, for the good of the family. Contribute, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Yes, Lila said, stepping forward. The red flush had faded from her cheeks. replaced by a calculating, desperate look. She'd been humiliated, and now she was doubling down. And speaking of contributing, Avery, I'm a little short. She said it so casually, as if she were asking to borrow a pen. I just need about $4,000 to cover my Amex. My holiday content shoot is next week, and my brand imaging expenses they were a lot this quarter. You know how it is. She actually flipped her hair. You've always handled these little things for me. For a split second, I saw all of them in a clear, cold light. My father, with his honeydew list of dangerous electrical problems he was too cheap and lazy to hire a professional for. My mother, with her hand out, demanding I fund the very facade I wasn't allowed to be part of. And Lila, my God, Lila, demanding $4,000 for her holiday content 5 minutes after calling my life's work plaster dust. And Graham, he was standing near the door, his arms crossed. He hadn't said a word. His face was a mask of careful neutrality, but his eyes were sharp. He was watching this transaction. He was a risk assessor, after all, and he was watching a system of exploitation so practiced, so blatant, that it was almost clumsy. He was watching them strip mine me, and he finally understood that this wasn't a family supporting each other. This was a parasitic organism, and I was the host. I felt the old reflex, the deep, ingrained, 31-year-old habit, the urge to just make it stop, to say yes, to say, I'll look at the breaker, Mom, and how much do you need, Lila? Just to end the confrontation, to absorb the impact, to be the mature one, the good one, the useful one, just to make them leave. But then I thought of the warehouse, the glow of the cheap string lights, the sound of Mr. Petrov laughing, the serious, proud look on Leo's face when I handed him the carving knife. And I thought of Graham's face, lit up with professional respect, saying, You drew the bright, unbreakable line. They were waiting, my father, my mother, my sister, all of them, leaning in, expecting the yes they had built their lives on. I took a breath. I let it out. No. It was one word. It was quiet. It was flat. It was the calmest, heaviest, most complete word I have ever spoken. The apartment didn't just get quiet. The silence was absolute, a vacuum. They stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking in a different language. My mother's fake sweet smile froze, then cracked. Lila's eyes widened. My father's jaw literally dropped. They looked at me as if I had just taken a swing at them. My mother recovered first. Her face, which had been pleading, contorted into something ugly, something I'd seen 1,000 times but never had directed at me so purely. No, she shrieked, her voice cracking. No? What do you mean? No. I mean no, I said, my voice just as quiet, just as steady. No, I will not be fixing your electrical. No, I will not be paying for your new couch. And Lila, no, I will not be giving you $4,000 for your Instagram photos. You ungrateful. My mother was sputtering, her hands clenching at her sides. After everything we've done for you, after the sacrifices we made, we gave you a home. We raised you. This is how you repay us? You forget where you came from. Is that it? She was twisting it, turning all the years I had served them, all the money I had given, all the labor I had provided, and painting me as the one in debt. My father jumped in, his voice a low growl. He saw he was losing Graham's respect, and it made him mean. That's what it is, isn't it? You get a little praise from some stranger on the internet, and suddenly you're too good for us. You think you're better than your own family, don't you? With your tools, you think you're better than me? He was jabbing a finger at my chest, hitting that deep, cold fear he'd installed in me when I was 11. You're not pretty, but you're useful. He was telling me that my use had run out. Lila, seeing her last chance, tried to pivot to Graham, her eyes filling with tears again. But this time, they were for him, not for her. You see, Graham, you see what I have to deal with? This is what she does. She plays the victim. She hoards her money, and she holds these things over our heads just to manipulate us. She's so toxic. Graham finally spoke. His voice was calm, analytical. He didn't even look at Lila. He was looking at me. Lila, he said, how much did your last car repair cost? The one for the new brakes and the transmission work? Lila was thrown. What, I don't know. A couple thousand? And you paid for that? Graham asked. Well, Avery handled it, like she said. She's the stable one. Graham's eyes stayed on me. How long, Avery? He asked, his voice low. How long have you been handling it? And with that one question, the dam of my maturity, my silence, finally broke. But it wasn't a flood. It was a calm, controlled release. The late fees on their second mortgage, I said, my voice clear and cold. I've been paying those on and off for 3 years, so the bank doesn't send a notice. I replaced their entire heating system 2 winters ago. When the boiler finally died, that was $9,000, which I paid for out of my business account. I paid for Lila's last 2 brand imaging car repairs, and 5 years ago, when my father took out a predatory loan from a payday lender that he couldn't pay back, I was the one who went down, took a cash advance on my own credit, and paid those loan sharks $7,500 so they wouldn't break his legs, or worse, come to the house. The room was dead. My mother's face was white. My father looked like I had, quite literally, just punched him in the stomach. He wasn't angry that I was lying. He was apoplectic that I was telling the truth. I had taken their perfect middle-class facade, the one they'd built out of my labor and my money, and I had pulled the wires out of it in front of their audience. You weren't just stable, Graham said quietly, mostly to himself. You were the bank, the contractor, and the shield. I walked the 4 steps from the middle of my small living room to my front door. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned it and pulled the door open. The cold, drafty air from the hallway felt good. Get out, I said. My mother gasped. Avery, get out of my house, I said again, louder this time, but still not yelling. I am not your 24/7 electrician. I am not your family ATM. And I am not your emotional punching bag anymore. The job is over. You are not my clients. And I quit. My mother and father looked shattered, but not from sadness, from rage. The rage of being exposed. They stumbled out, bumping into each other. My mother whispering, How could you? My father just shaking his head, his face purple. Lila stood there for a second, her eyes darting between me and Graham. She was trying to calculate, to see if there was any way to save this, to spin this. Graham? She said, her voice a pathetic whine. Are you coming? Graham was still standing by the door, his overcoat still on. He looked at Lila, and his face was unreadable. Then he looked at me. His expression was a complex mixture of apology, regret, and something else. Something I'd seen on sight, respect. He gave me a single, sharp nod, as if to say, I see you. Then he turned, and with a deep sigh, he followed her out of the door. I watched them go. My father, defeated, my mother, furious, Lila, sobbing, and Graham, walking behind them, already a million miles away. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly, and I heard the click of the latch. I turned the deadbolt, a clean connection. I leaned my back against the solid wood of the door. The only thing separating me from them, the adrenaline was draining, leaving my legs shaky. I'd done it. For the first time in my life, in a direct, head-on confrontation, I had chosen myself. And the power I felt wasn't the satisfying, explosive boom of a breaker tripping. It was the opposite. It was a profound, sudden, and complete quiet. The high-pitched, draining hum that had been my background noise for 31 years had finally, blissfully, stopped. The line was cut. The silence that followed their exit was almost as loud as the confrontation. I had expected my phone to detonate, to be flooded with a barrage of weeping voicemails, all-caps texts demanding an apology, or passive-aggressive guilt trips from my mother. Instead, there was nothing. 3 days passed, and the silence from my family was absolute, cold and heavy. It was an uneasy quiet, the kind that settles over a job site just before a major inspection, when you are not sure if you have passed or just not been caught yet. I threw myself into my work. I went to the 3rd Street warehouse, and I did not just fix the emergency lights for Sal. I spent 12 hours rerunning the conduit, replacing every single battery pack, and recertifying the entire system. When I was on a ladder, pulling wire, my head was quiet. When I was tightening a lug nut, my hands were steady. But in the quiet moments, driving between jobs, or lying in bed at night, the scene in my apartment would play back. Every word. My mother's outraged face. My father's accusation that I thought I was better than them. Lila's casual, almost bored, request for $4,000. The more it replayed, the less I felt the sting of the personal insults. The shame was burning off, leaving behind the cold, hard wiring of the system itself. I was seeing the schematic. This was not a dysfunctional family. This was a parasitic one, and I had been the host for so long. They had mistaken my compliance for consent. On Friday, I stopped by the IBEW Union Hall to pay my monthly dues and check the new job postings. The hall is my sanctuary. It smells like stale coffee, old newspapers, and the faint, metallic scent of new copper. Mike, a big, gruff electrician who had been my journeyman instructor almost 15 years ago, was at the back table, squinting at a racing form. "Bright," he grunted, not looking up as I poured a cup of coffee that was thick as tar. "Heard you did a nice thing on Thanksgiving. Kid Jake was running his mouth. Said you ran a hell of a spread." "It was just dinner, Mike," I said, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, well, better than the dinner your old man is serving, I bet." I froze, the coffee cup halfway to my mouth. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mike sighed, finally folding his newspaper and looking up at me over his bifocals. "Ah, it's just chatter. You know this place." "What chatter, Mike?" I asked, my voice flat. He saw I was serious. "Just be careful. Avery, that's all. I heard your dad's little LLC is back in action. Mercer Property Group, right? Trying to flip those old brick row houses over on Division Street." My stomach tightened. "He's always trying to flip something. It's his hobby." "This ain't a hobby," Mike said, his voice dropping. "This is chatter from non-union guys I know. The word is, he's cutting corners. Not just cheap, I mean deep cuts, bypassing inspections, using day labor to pull wire. A guy I know said he got a look at a service panel in one of those units. Said it looked like a bomb went off in a spaghetti factory. Just be careful your name isn't anywhere near that mess, kid. That's all I'm saying." A cold dread, sharp and acidic, washed over me. My dad's cheap, Mike, but he's not. He wouldn't risk that. He's not an idiot. "He's lazy," Mike said, turning back to his form. "And lazy is always stupid, and greedy is worse." I left the hall. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to believe my father was just a harmless, irresponsible man who relied on his daughter to fix his thermostat. But the thought that he might be pulling wire, him, a man who could barely change a light bulb, it was more than reckless. It was dangerous. The unease that had been humming in my chest for a week suddenly spiked into a high-voltage alarm. That night, an email lit up my laptop. It was not from my family. The sender name was simply Graham Alden. The subject line was one word, confidential. The email was short. It was precise. It was not written by Lila's boyfriend. It was written by a risk assessor. "Ms. Bright, my apologies for this unsolicited contact. I find myself in a professional situation that I believe has a direct and concerning overlap with your own. Specifically, your name, or rather, the reputation attached to it, has been used in a manner I think you should be aware of. Would you be willing to meet? Strictly off the record, I believe it is a matter of some urgency. Graham. We met 2 nights later, on a Sunday. He chose a bar near the train station. A dark, old wood place with heavy curtains and quiet booths. It was designed for secrets. I saw him in the back booth. He looked exhausted. The sharp, tailored coat veneer from my apartment was gone. He was in a dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, his hair a mess, and he looked like he had not slept. He had a thick leather briefcase on the seat beside him. He stood when I approached. "Avery, thank you for coming," he said. "Graham," I said, sliding into the booth. "You said, 'off the record.' What is this?" A waitress came over. I ordered a club soda. I needed my head clear. He waited until she walked away. "First," he said, his voice low, "so we have no misconceptions. I am no longer involved with Lila. That relationship ended approximately 1 hour after we left your apartment." "That's none of my business," I said. "It is," he said, his voice grim, "because it's all part of the same ecosystem. As I told you, I'm in risk assessment. My firm underwrites loan portfolios for investors looking to buy into residential rentals. We vet the landlords, we check the assets, we make sure the investment is sound and the liability is low." He put his briefcase on the table and unfastened the clasps. It clicked open. He pulled out a thick, spiral-bound report and slid it across the table. The cover read, "Mercer Property Group, Acquisition Portfolio Review." My blood ran cold. "Your father's LLC," Graham said, "is applying for a 7-figure line of credit to acquire 3 more buildings on the waterfront. My firm was hired to do the due diligence, to vet his existing properties." "And?" I whispered. "And," he said, "the portfolio was flagged. The numbers looked too clean. For buildings of that age, we're talking pre-war, some with original knob and tube, you'd expect a long history of violations, fixes, abatements. It's normal. But your father's properties?" He flipped open the report. "Perfect, spotless, a clean bill of health, signed off on every 6 months, which we thought was odd. But then we saw the inspector's name." "My name," I breathed. "No," Graham said, and he looked me right in the eye. "That's the entire problem. It wasn't your name. It was some guy named T.L. Barnes. We ran his license. He's a rubber stamp. He's known in the trade. He'll sign off on a burning building for $500. "Then what does this have to do with me?" "Because," Graham said, "that's the official paperwork he files with the city. What my firm does is, we send our own surveyors out, unannounced, to just look, and what they found." He pulled a different, thinner folder from his case. This one was full of photographs. My stomach churned. It was everything Mike had said, and worse, a junction box so crammed with wires it was bulging. The cover taped on. Char marks blackening a wall around an outlet. Wires stripped with what looked like a kitchen knife, and in one, a picture of a rusted breaker panel, with pennies jammed in the fuse sockets. I felt physically ill. This was not cutting corners. This was building a funeral pyre. "Our surveyors flagged every property as imminent catastrophic risk," Graham said, his voice flat. "But that's not the part that concerns you. This is—" He turned a page. It was a printout of an email chain, a tenant complaint, forwarded to my father, Mr. Mercer. My fridge keeps giving me a shock. I'm afraid to touch it. Another one. The lights in the baby's room flicker so badly I'm afraid to leave him in there. And at the bottom, an internal note, a forwarded message from my father's email account to his property manager, the one who was stalling the tenants. "Just tell them we're on it. Stall. My daughter is a master electrician. We'll get Avery to look at it after the holidays. She'll handle it." I stared at the words. "My daughter will handle it." Graham tapped the paper. He was playing both sides. He's paying a criminal to sign the official reports to get the loans, and he's using your name, your sterling, unimpeachable, won't sign off on a death trap reputation, as the unofficial insurance policy to placate his tenants and, he hoped, my investors. He leaned forward, his voice a furious whisper. He was literally telling people, "Don't worry, it's a disaster. But Avery Bright is my backstop. The electrician who wouldn't sign, the one I'm so proud of. She's my daughter. She'll fix it all, for free." He sat back, his face grim. "He wasn't just using you to pay for his couch. Avery, he was using your integrity as collateral. He was cashing in your good name to fund his criminal negligence." A silence stretched between us. "Did you," he asked, his voice gentle now, "ever sign any inspection reports for the Division Street properties? Did you ever see those panels?" "No," I said, and my voice was shaking, not with sadness, with a rage so cold and so pure it scared me. "No, never. I would have shut him down. I would have called the city myself. Graham. People could die. He put pennies in a fuse box." "I know," he said. This was it. This was the real betrayal. It wasn't about a holiday dinner. It wasn't about my calloused hands. It wasn't even about the money. It was this. He had taken the one thing I had built for myself, the one thing I was proud of, my reputation, my name, and he had used it. He had used it as a shield to hide his own deadly, greedy incompetence. He had made me an accomplice to a crime I did not even know was happening. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "My firm has already red-flagged the portfolio, obviously. We're rejecting the loan application," he said, packing the papers back into his briefcase with sharp, precise movements. "And we are legally and ethically obligated to forward our findings, the discrepancy between the T.L. Barnes reports and our own surveyor's photos, to the city's Department of Buildings, and most likely, to the district attorney's office." He snapped the briefcase shut. "I am not asking you to do anything," he said, finally looking at me. "I'm not asking you to testify. I'm not asking you to get involved. After what I saw in your apartment, after what they did, I could not, in good conscience, let them do this to your name as well." He stood up. "You had a right to know. You had a right to know what they were using you for." I left the bar. I do not remember walking home. I was moving, but I could not feel my legs. The cold November air felt hot on my skin. This was not about a family drama. This was not about hurt feelings. This was about the code, the literal electrical code that keeps people from being burned alive in their beds, and the moral code I had built my entire life on. They had uninvited me because my work was an embarrassment, but they had been secretly, silently, wrapping themselves in my reputation, using my integrity as a fire blanket. I got to my apartment. I did not turn on the lights. I walked straight to my office, to the big, gray metal file cabinet. They thought I was a tool, a simple, useful tool. I yanked open the bottom drawer, the one marked Mercer, Personal. Inside was everything. 15 years of my life, every check I had ever written them, every invoice for their house that I had marked paid out of my own pocket, every desperate, late-night email. "Avery, the furnace is dead." Every pleading text. "Avery, Lila's car broke down again. Can you just handle it?" I began to pull them out. I was not just building a timeline of their dependency. I was building a case. I was building a timeline that would show, with perfect, itemized clarity, every single job I had ever done on their primary residence. And more importantly, it would show the complete, total, and deafening absence of any work, any invoice, any email, or any text message ever related to Mercer Property Group. I was drawing a bright line, the one I was famous for. I stood in my dark office, the only light coming from the Riverton skyline outside my window. I looked out at the city, at the thousands of lights in the buildings I helped build, the grid I helped maintain. My family thought I was a tool. They were right. But they had mistaken me for a hammer, something blunt and simple. I was a master electrician. I knew exactly where all the hidden wires were. I knew where the junction boxes were. I knew how the entire rotten system was powered. And I knew, better than anyone, exactly how to pull the main, cut the feed, and shut their whole goddamned house of cards down. December rolled in. cold and sharp. My silence with my family was a solid block of ice, untouched. I was working 60-hour weeks, taking on extra projects, burying myself in the clean, logical world of conduit and code. Then, one Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a notification from a group chat I'd forgotten I was in. Mercer Family Holiday Fun. They had forgotten to remove me. My mother had posted a professionally designed digital invitation. You're invited to a pre-Christmas open house at the home of Frank and Diana Mercer. The photo was a masterpiece of Lila's beige aesthetic. The dining room, shot in soft focus, a new, enormous, pristine white centerpiece on the table. The caption, in a flowing, unreadable script, was something about gathering our blessings and the joy of family unity. It was a lie. It was a PR campaign. After the Thanksgiving humiliation, after I had refused to fund their facade, they were doubling down. They were throwing a massive party for the entire extended family to prove one thing. We are fine. We are stable. We are blessed. Avery was the problem, and we are better without her. I looked at the invitation, at the perfectly staged room. I thought about the faulty breaker in the kitchen and the water stain on the ceiling. I deleted the notification and went back to my blueprints. That Saturday, the day of their open house, I was nowhere near Newberry. I was in the gymnasium of the Riverton Youth Center, a nonprofit that ran after-school programs for about 100 kids. Their lighting was dangerously old. A series of buzzing, flickering, high-bay mercury vapor lights from the 1970s that probably gave everyone headaches. Bright Electric had won a grant, and we were donating all the labor to replace the entire system with new, efficient, bright white LEDs. It was a massive job. I was on a scissor lift, 30 feet in the air, with Jake and 2 other apprentices, running new conduit and swapping out fixtures. The work was hard, it was dirty, and it was the most satisfying thing I'd done all year. The first guests arrived at the Mercer house at exactly 7 p.m. My mother, Diana, greeted them at the door, wearing a new silk blouse that was just a shade too tight. "Carol, Jim, come in, so wonderful to see you." The house did look good. My mother had spent money she didn't have, probably on a new credit card I hadn't co-signed, on 1,000 tiny white fairy lights, which were draped over every conceivable surface. There was a new plush rug in the living room. The air smelled of mulled wine and expensive pine-scented candles. Lila was there, of course, playing the part of the gracious daughter, gliding through the rooms in a cashmere dress. Graham was not. He had, as he'd told me, ended things. Lila was flying solo, and her smile was brittle. The relatives trickled in, aunts, uncles, cousins. They grabbed glasses of wine. They marveled at the new centerpiece, and they asked the inevitable question. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, looked around the crowded living room. "It all looks lovely. Just beautiful, but where's Avery?" My mother's smile didn't flicker. She had rehearsed this. "Oh, you know Avery," she said, with a light, dismissive laugh. "She's just so busy with work. That job of hers, it's all-consuming. She just prefers to be on her own. A bit of a homebody, you know." My father, standing by the electric fireplace, which was glowing with a fake, unconvincing light, chimed in, raising his glass. "That's our Avery. Chose her wires over her family. What can you do?" A few people chuckled, a weak, uncertain sound. They were used to Avery being the butt of the joke, the useful one, but something about this felt different. The party moved on. People clustered around the charcuterie board, the one set up on the dining room table, directly under the new centerpiece. They were talking about football, about the weather, about their kids. And then, at 7:45 p.m., as my cousin Mark was reaching for a handful of olives, the entire living room, dining room, and kitchen went dark. The music stopped. The electric fireplace clicked off. The thousands of twinkling fairy lights, all of them, every single one, plugged into a series of cheap, non-surge protected power strips, all daisy-chained into the one faulty outlet in the dining room, all went dead. The only light came from the dim hallway bulb, which was on a different circuit. The room was plunged into a sudden, shocked silence. "Oh, for God's sake," my mother's voice, high and panicked, cut through the dark. "Frank? Frank, what happened?" "It's just the breaker." My father's voice was too loud, too hearty. "Just a little overload. No problem. I'll have it back on in a jiffy." The guests heard him clomp down the basement stairs. From below, they heard a series of heavy metallic clunk sounds. Nothing happened. Clunk, clunk, clunk. "Damn it," my father's voice, a muffled yell from the basement. "It's not resetting this stupid thing." In the darkness, the murmuring began. The guests, no longer distracted by wine and cheese, were just a group of people standing in a dark, cold room. "The breaker? Again?" someone whispered. "Doesn't this always happen?" "Where's Avery? She usually fixes this." "Didn't you hear? She's busy." "That's funny. I ran into her apprentice at the supply house last week. He said she's working pro bono at the youth center all weekend. Seemed like a big deal." "Wait," said my Aunt Nadia, my father's sister. She was a woman with a voice like gravel and a low tolerance for nonsense. She didn't whisper, she spoke, and her voice carried across the entire dark, crowded room. "Diana? Frank? Why would you even expect her to be here?" "Nadia, please." My mother's voice was a strained hiss. "We're handling it." "No, I'm serious," Nadia said, and you could almost hear her planting her feet. "I talked to Mom." She meant my grandmother. "On Thanksgiving. She told me you two uninvited Avery, kicked her out of her own family's holiday. Is that true?" The silence that followed was heavier, colder, and darker than the lack of light. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin, frozen. It was a misunderstanding," my father said, having just come back up the basement stairs, defeated. "No," a new voice slurred. "It was my cousin Ronnie, who had been at the spiked cider for an hour. No, that's not what Grandma said. Grandma said, she said you uninvited Avery because you were ashamed of her job, 'cause she's a worker, and Lila's boyfriend was too fancy for her. You could have heard a pin drop on the new plush carpet. And suddenly, all the little pieces clicked into place for everyone in that room, all the years of passive-aggressive jokes, all the thankless tasks. My God, said Uncle Jim, the one who had always been quiet. I remember. It was Avery who fixed your boiler last winter. In the middle of the night. You called her, Frank, not a plumber. And she paid that tax fine, Aunt Carol gasped, remembering. The one you forgot about? She told me she had to float you the money so the county wouldn't put a lien on this house. She rewired my entire garage for me last summer, Cousin Mark said, his voice full of a new, dawning anger. I tried to pay her. She wouldn't take a dime, she said. That's what family is for. And you? You kicked her out? Because of her hands? The thread finally snapped. It was Uncle Jim again, and his voice was low, and it was disgusted. This is sick. Frank, it sounds to me like you turned your own daughter into a free mechanic, your personal bank, and your all-hours repairman, and then you threw her in the trash because you wanted to impress some rich kid for Lila. What the hell is wrong with you? My father and mother stood there, frozen, illuminated only by the dim hallway light, their entire facade ripped away in front of their whole audience. And that was the exact moment the universe, or maybe just the laws of physics and shoddy maintenance, decided to deliver the final punchline. Drip. A single drop of water, cold and heavy, fell from the ceiling. Drip. It landed, with an audible splat, directly in the center of the $800 floral centerpiece. Drip, drip, drip. That tiny little water stain on the ceiling, the one my father had been gonna have Avery look at, had finally, after months of neglect, saturated the drywall. The water from the leaking pipe in the attic, which had been slowly collecting in the ceiling, found its escape route. A second drip started, then a third, One landed on the charcuterie board, splashing a perfect beige-filtered smear of pâté. Another one hit the new plush rug. A woman shrieked, "The ceiling is leaking!" It wasn't a leak anymore. It was a pour. The drywall, heavy and sodden, began to sag. A steady stream of icy, rust-colored water began to rain down on the blessed family table. The party dissolved into chaos. People were yelling. My mother was screaming, "No, no, not the rug!" My father was running to the kitchen, not to the main water shutoff. He probably didn't even know where it was, but to get pots. Aunt Nadia, in her heels, slipped on the wet floor and went down, taking a tray of glasses with her. Kids started to cry. The beautiful magazine-ready open house had devolved, in less than 5 minutes, into a dark, cold, wet, embarrassing farce. And standing in the corner, near the front door, having arrived only minutes before the blackout, was Graham. He had come, not as Lila's guest, but because he'd told me he was curious to see the second act. He had been standing there, a silent observer in his good overcoat, and he had watched the entire thing. He watched them lie about Avery. He watched them fail to handle a simple breaker. He watched their own family turn on them with the truth. And he watched, with the analytical, detached gaze of a risk assessor, as the entire rotten structure literally, physically, collapsed on itself. He watched the precise, predictable, and catastrophic failure that occurs when you ignore a critical problem for too long. Cut. 30 feet in the air, in the warm, bright gymnasium of the Riverton Youth Center, I pulled my gloves tight. "Okay, Jake," I called down. "That's the last fixture in the bank. Hit the main." "You got it, boss." I watched as Jake, at the brand new panel we'd installed, put his hand on the main breaker. "Clear," he yelled. He threw the switch. There was a moment of perfect, satisfying silence, a thunk. And then, the entire gymnasium flooded with bright, clean, beautiful, even light. The old, buzzing mercury vapor fixtures were gone, and in their place, a daylight bright system that made the whole room feel new. The 30 or so kids who were waiting in the bleachers, who had been watching us all day, let out a massive cheer. They started clapping and stomping their feet. I unhooked my safety harness, my face splitting into a grin I couldn't stop. I rode the lift down, the cheers of the kids echoing in my ears. This was real. This was light. This was a job well done. I was on the ground, packing up my tools. When my phone buzzed in my pocket, I figured it was Jake, texting me from the other side of the gym. I pulled it out, a new message, from Graham. It was one sentence. "You were absolutely right to get out of there. I'll call you tomorrow." The disaster at the open house was, for me, just a story. I heard it in pieces, whispered at the supply house, and then in a long, detailed, and slightly guilty phone call from Aunt Nadia, who called just to make sure I was okay, and to tell me she slipped on their damn floor and would be sending them the bill for her chiropractor. My parents didn't call, not directly. After about a week of silence, the texts started. They were always from my mother. "I hope you're happy. Your father's health is not good. You've put him under terrible stress." I deleted it. 2 days later, "Your grandmother is very disappointed in you. Tearing this family apart is not a victory. Avery." I deleted it. The last one came a week before Christmas. "We are all alone. Lila won't even talk to us. You did this. You took our whole family away just to be right. Merry Christmas." I blocked her number, my father's too. It was like putting a lock on a live panel. It wasn't about anger. It was about safety, my safety. The silence that followed was vast and clean and entirely mine, and I filled it. I poured every ounce of energy I had, every bit of adrenaline from the confrontation, into Bright Electric. I was on site at 6 a.m., and I was doing paperwork until 9 p.m., but it wasn't a grind. It was a build. I took on 2 new apprentices, both young women from the Riverton vocational program. I showed them how to read a 3-phase schematic and how to bend 1-inch conduit with a hydraulic bender. I changed the focus of the company. We were still a commercial contractor, but I started actively bidding on safety inspection contracts for nonprofits and residential co-op boards. I offered discounted rates for organizations like Miss Evans's Shelter to come in and do a full system audit. My slogan, printed on our new invoices, was simple. Safety isn't a line item, it's the whole ass line. In March, an editor from Trade and Code, a national electrical industry magazine, called me. They had heard about the Hudson Valley Galleria case through the grapevine, through the risk assessment world. They wanted to do a profile on me, on Bright Electric. I was so uncomfortable I almost said no, but I thought of Mike at the Union Hall, and I thought of my 2 new apprentices. I said yes. The article came out in May. It was a 2-page spread. There was a picture of me, standing on a work site, blueprints in my hand, my company logo on my hard hat. The headline was, "The Bright Line, How One Riverton Electrician is Putting Ethics and Code Back on the Bottom Line." The day it came out, I left a copy on the table at the Union Hall. When I came back an hour later, Mike had it taped up on the wall, right over the coffee machine, for everyone to see. I pretended to be annoyed about it, but I took 1 copy home and slid it into the back of my desk drawer, right on top of the file of my family's old invoices. With the little bit of press, I got an idea. I still had the lease on the 3rd Street warehouse. It was mostly just storage, but it was space. I launched a new program, the Wired Right Workshops. I put up flyers at the library, the youth center, and the Union Hall. A free weekend workshop for women, teens, and tenants. Learn basic electrical safety. Learn how to spot a landlord's dangerous shortcuts. Learn your rights. The first Saturday, I expected maybe 5 people. 30 showed up. There were single moms, elderly renters from Division Street, college kids from the cheap apartments. They were all nervous, and they were all angry. They had stories about sparking outlets, landlords who used duct tape, and bills that seemed too high. So I taught them. I set up a demo panel. I showed them what a properly grounded outlet looks like. I showed them what a melted, scorched, dangerous outlet looks like. I showed them photos of pennies in a fuse box. I showed them how to use a $20 outlet tester. I taught them the specific legal language to use in a letter to their landlord, the words that would make them a problem a landlord would have to solve. The warehouse changed. It was still my company's headquarters, but it became something else. The side with the conduit racks and the wire spools was the work side. The other side, the big open space where I'd held the Thanksgiving dinner, was the community side. I kept the folding tables up. I brought in a good coffee machine. On Saturdays, I'd order a stack of pizzas. My apprentices, Jake and the 2 new women, would hang out, helping people. And they became, without me ever planning it, the hub. One Saturday in late April, I was in the middle of explaining the difference between a breaker and a fuse when I saw a figure in the doorway. He was in jeans and a plain gray Henley, not a tailored overcoat. He was just standing there, watching. It was Graham. He hadn't called. He'd just shown up. I finished my point and walked over to him, wiping my hands on a rag. "Risk assessor in the wrong part of town?" I asked. He smiled, a small, tired smile. "I heard you were teaching people how to fight their landlords. That's usually my territory." "Just teaching them how not to get electrocuted," I said. "What are you doing here, Graham?" "I've been following the workshops. Online. Your apprentice Jake posts about them a lot." He gestured to the crowd. "This is impressive. Avery, you're not just fixing problems. You're teaching people how to see them. That's the real work." He held up a flyer he'd grabbed from the front table. "I have a note, though, if you're open to it." "Always." "This section," he said, pointing to my paragraph on what to say to your landlord. "It's good, it's practical, but you're missing the magic words, the specific legal code references that trigger a mandatory city inspection within 48 hours. You want to add a section on understanding the building code as a tenant's right?" I looked at him, at his rolled-up sleeves and his earnest, tired eyes. "And you, I suppose, know those magic words?" "I know all of them," he said. They're my whole job. I thought maybe I could do a 10-minute segment. Pro bono, of course. And that's how it started. He wasn't Lila's boyfriend. He wasn't an investor. He was just Graham. He became a regular. He'd show up with a box of donuts, and he'd do his 10-minute Know Your Rights speech, and he'd translate the dense, impossible legal language of a lease into simple, powerful words. And our bond, the one forged in that weird, tense moment in my apartment, deepened. But it wasn't about dinners or movies. It was about work. I'd show him a picture of a dangerously overloaded panel, and he'd show me the exact city statute it violated. He helped me rewrite my pamphlets so they were legally ironclad. I taught him how to use a multimeter to check if an appliance was properly grounded. We were two nerds, speaking the same language of systems, and rules, and consequences. One night, after a workshop, we were the last two left, stacking chairs. "Did you ever hear?" I asked, not looking at him. "About the Division Street properties? About my father?" "Yes," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't hedge. "My firm filed its report. The city opened an investigation, as I'm sure you know. The DA's office subpoenaed our surveyor's files last month." "So it's happening," I said. It wasn't a question. "It is." He stopped stacking and just held a metal chair in his hands. "Avery, I just want to be clear. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it because of what you taught me. The bright, unbreakable line. We couldn't underwrite a loan that was secured by what were, effectively, fire traps. I couldn't be complicit in that. No one should." I nodded. "I know." And I realized, in that moment, how I felt, the last, tiny, flickering pilot light of guilt I'd felt. The one my mother had been trying to stoke with her texts. It just went out. I had not done this to them. I had not taken their family away. I had not ruined them. I had just stopped. I had stopped being their shield. I had stopped being the one who would silently handle it. I had stepped out of the way, and they were, for the first time, standing in the full, harsh, unfiltered light of their own consequences, and the structure, as it turned out, couldn't stand on its own. The months passed. Summer was a blur of work. Fall came, crisp and clear, and suddenly, it was November again. I was at the warehouse, looking at the calendar. Thanksgiving was a week away. I didn't wait. I didn't wonder. I didn't check my phone for an invitation I knew would never come, and which I would never accept. I sent out one mass text. "Thanksgiving, 3rd Street Warehouse, 4 p.m., be there, bring something, or don't, just come." I bought more tables. I bought 2 more industrial space heaters. And they came. They didn't just trickle in, they poured in. Ms. Evans and Maria and Mr. Petrov and my apprentices, but this time, they brought people. Maria brought her entire extended family, the ones who lived in one of the Division Street buildings. Ms. Evans brought 3 women from the shelter who were transitioning into new housing. My apprentices brought their friends. A nurse I had met on a hospital job site showed up, still in her scrubs, carrying a pumpkin pie. A whole crew from the Union Hall came by, holding a massive 20-pound tub of potato salad from the deli. The warehouse was loud, and it was chaotic, and it was packed. There were at least 50 people. I was trying to carve a turkey when a man I didn't recognize, one of Maria's cousins, tapped me on the shoulder. He was holding up a plastic cup of cider. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was thick with an accent. Are you Avery? Ms. Bright?"
"I am."
"We," he said, gesturing to his family, who were all sitting at one of the long tables, watching. "We want to say thank you." "You're welcome," I said, confused. "Happy Thanksgiving." "No," he said, and his eyes were serious. "Thank you." Maria told us, You are the reason the city is finally listening. You are the reason the inspector finally came to our building. The landlord. He has to fix the wires now. He has to fix the heat." He raised his plastic cup. "Our kids will be warm this winter. because of you. You treated our homes, our little, broken homes. You treated them like they mattered, even when the landlord, even when the city, didn't. So, thank you. Salud. He drank, and his whole table raised their plastic cups and drank with him. And then, the people at the next table, who had heard, raised their cups, and the table next to them. The whole room was silent, and then they all just applauded. It wasn't a roar, it was a warm, steady, rolling sound of hands. For me. I felt that old familiar burn behind my eyes, but it wasn't shame, it wasn't anger. It was belonging. It was a feeling I had never, ever had. I had not been useful. I had not fixed their oven. I had been trusted. I had been chosen. And it was a feeling so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. The party went late. It was a wonderful, loud, messy, authentic celebration. When it finally wound down, when the last of the families had packed up plates of leftovers, and the kids were asleep on their parents' shoulders, I was left with a mountain of trash bags and a sea of folding chairs. "Go home, Jake," I said to my apprentice, who was starting to sweep. "You've earned it." When the room was finally empty, I turned to start on the chairs. You missed one. Graham was standing by the door, holding a black trash bag. He'd been there the whole time, quietly washing dishes in the utility sink, talking to the tenants, refilling the cider. "Go home, Graham," I said, smiling. "Your pro bono work is done." "I'm not on the clock," he said. He picked up the back of a folding chair. I picked up the front. We folded it and leaned it against the wall. We worked in a comfortable, quiet rhythm, chair after chair. The only sound was the clack of metal and the scraping of legs on the concrete. There was a warmth between us, a soft, steady hum that didn't need a name. It was just there. When we were done, we stood by the big metal door. "You built this, Avery," he said, looking back at the empty, clean room, lit by the string lights that I had never bothered to take down. It's really something." "It's just a warehouse," I said, zipping up my jacket. "No, it's not." He walked me to my truck. The Riverton streets were cold, the air sharp and clean. "Thank you," I said, "for helping." "It was the best Thanksgiving I've had in a long time," he said. He stood there for a second, and I thought he might. I don't know what I thought, but he just smiled. That small, tired, genuine smile. "Good night, Avery." "Good night, Graham." I drove home. I parked my truck. I walked into my quiet apartment. I stood in my living room, and I realized my parents had not called. Lila had not texted. I had not thought about them, not once, all day. I had a life, a full, noisy, complicated, satisfying life, and it had absolutely nothing to do with them. I had built it myself, from the ground up, and it was wired right. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't need their invitation. I was full. The year that followed was a blur of conduit, blueprints, and community. The Wired Right workshops became a standing room-only event. My company hired 2 more apprentices. Graham and I fell into an easy, unspoken rhythm that was part partnership, part something else. We were building things, and it was good. The city's investigation into Mercer Property Group was a low, distant hum. I was not involved. Just a name on a report he had filed. My parents and I had not spoken a single word in almost 11 months. The silence was, by now, comfortable. It was just a fact. Then, 2 weeks before the second Thanksgiving, an envelope arrived at my apartment. My name, Avery Bright, was written in a flowing gold ink calligraphy. The envelope was thick, heavy, and expensive. It was postmarked from Newbury. I didn't open it right away. I set it on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. It felt like a bomb. I finally slid it open. It was an invitation, printed on cardstock so thick it could stop a bullet. "Please join us for a Thanksgiving of healing. The Newbury Grand Ballroom. Thursday, November 27th, 7 o'clock in the evening." A Thanksgiving of healing. Not at their home, which I'd heard through the grapevine was in foreclosure, but at a rented ballroom. The invitation itself was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It spoke of the importance of family and letting go of recent misunderstandings and stress. It was a masterclass in blame shifting, framing a year of silence, theft, and investigation as a misunderstanding, as stress, as if I were the one who had been unreasonable. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from my mother, on matching gold-trimmed stationery. Avery, honey, I know we haven't seen eye to eye, but this has gone on long enough. Your father and I are inviting the entire family to this dinner, to show everyone that we are still a family, united and strong. We have been through so much. Please, I am begging you. Come. For the sake of the family's image, the aunts and uncles, they just won't stop talking. We don't need to get into all the internal details. We just need to stand together. Please, Avery, don't do this to me. Don't do this to your father. I read the note twice. I felt the old, familiar acid rise in my throat. For the sake of the family's image, we don't need to get into all the internal details. Don't do this to me. It was not an apology. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. It was a threat. After a year of silence, after everything that had happened, they were still trying to manipulate me, to use me as a prop in their final desperate performance of the perfect, stable family. They were about to lose everything, and they thought one more party, one more show of unity, would stop the bleeding. My first instinct was to burn it, to throw it in the trash and go to my own Thanksgiving at the warehouse, the one I was already planning, and never look back. But as I stood there, holding that heavy, expensive lie in my hand, a new feeling took root, a cold, clear, steady one. They were inviting me to be their audience. They were gathering the entire family, the same aunts and uncles who had witnessed their humiliation at the open house, to watch me bend, to watch me come back into the fold, to prove that they had been the victims and I had been the ungrateful, difficult child all along. This was not an invitation, it was a trap. And I realized it was also an opportunity. It was the first time, and probably the last, that I would have the exact same audience they had assembled, the people they had lied to, the people they had used as a backdrop. This wasn't about internal details. This was a public matter. They had made it public when they'd uninvited me. They had made it public when they'd lied about me. I picked up my phone and called Graham. He listened, as he always did, without interrupting. When I was done, I asked, "Am I crazy? Or should I go?" "You're not crazy," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You're angry, and you have a right to be. But what's the plan? Avery, you can't just walk into a setup like that without a plan. What's the end game?" "The end game," I said, looking at the invitation, "is the truth, in front of everyone, no more whispers, no more he said, she said, just the facts, the internal details they are so terrified of." I spent the next week preparing. I went to the Union Hall and talked to Mike. "They're trying to pull you back in, kid," he said, gruff as ever. "If you go in there like an inspector, no emotion, just the code, just the facts, and you wear your damn boots." So I prepared. I went back to that file cabinet, the one with the Mercer personal file. I pulled it out. I didn't take the whole thing. I created a simple, one-page, double-sided sheet. On the front, a simple, itemized list. January 2020. New furnace installation, 9,150. March 2021. Lila Mercer. Car repair, 2,400. August 2022. Mercer property, late tax lien, 4,800. November 2023. Emergency boiler repair, $3,200. I listed only 5 of the major items, the ones I had the clearest invoices for. On the back, I printed, in large, clear font, the 2-sentence email my father had sent. "Just tell them we're on it. Stall. My daughter is a master electrician. We'll get Avery to look at it. I made one copy, I folded it, and I put it in a simple manila envelope. I also wrote a short speech, 3 paragraphs. I practiced it in front of my bathroom mirror until I could say it without my voice shaking, without a single tear. I was not going there as a daughter. I was going as an inspector. Thanksgiving night, the Newberry Grand Ballroom. It was exactly as ridiculous as it sounded. Chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly, waiters in white jackets. I had asked Graham to come. Not as a date, I'd said. As a witness, as my risk assessor. He'd just nodded. I've got your back, Avery. We walked in, and I had, as Mike advised, worn my boots. They were my newest pair. Clean, polished steel toes. I wore them with a simple, dark blazer, and on the lapel, I wore a single, small, enameled pin, the logo of my company, bright electric. It was my uniform. It was my armor. My parents were at the door, greeting people. My father, in a suit that was too tight. My mother, in a shimmering, desperate, champagne-colored dress. When she saw me, her face did a complex series of gymnastics. First, shock. I had not RSVP'd. Then, a wave of triumphant relief. Her prop had arrived. Then, a flash of pure, cold anger when she saw Graham, standing calmly, loyally, at my side. "Avery!" she gushed, pulling me into an embrace that felt like a vice. It was all performance, for the aunts and uncles standing right behind me. "You came. You came. I knew you would. Oh, our family. All together." She was already weeping. My father just grunted, clapping me on the arm, his eyes darting to Graham. "Glad you could make it. Avery?" Lila was hovering near the bar. She looked thin. Her beige armor was gone, replaced by a severe black dress. She saw me, saw Graham, and her face just crumpled. She looked like a ghost. She turned and walked quickly toward the ladies' room. We sat at the assigned table. Table 3, extended family. We were surrounded by the same aunts, uncles, and cousins. They were all looking at me, and then at my parents, and then back at me. They knew this was a performance. The dinner was served. It was dry, flavorless, and cost a fortune. And then, my mother stood up. She tapped a glass with a spoon. The string quartet stopped. "Family," she said, her voice trembling, her hand clutching a champagne flute. "My dearest, dearest family, thank you for coming. This last year, it's been hard." Her eyes filled with tears. My father put his hand on her back. The picture of the supportive husband. There have been misunderstandings. There have been forces trying to pull us apart. People who don't understand what family means. She looked directly at me. But family is everything. It is the only thing. It is the safe harbor. And in our family, we heal. We forgive. We forget. She was painting herself as the victim, the forgiving matriarch, attacked by a cruel, modern world of, what? Accountability? "They call it cancel culture in the world," she said, her voice dripping with self-pity. "But I never thought I would see it in my own home. I never thought I would be canceled by my own." She was brilliant. She was painting me as a cruel, heartless canceller who had tried to destroy her, simply for a misunderstanding. She raised her glass. "So I want to make a toast to healing, to forgiveness, and to family, above all, always." The room was silent. A few people, my father included, mumbled, "to family," and drank. My mother sat down, dabbing her eyes, a triumphant, martyred smile on her face. She had won. She had framed the narrative. I was the villain. I put my napkin on the table. I stood up. My mother's smile froze. My father's head snapped toward me. "Avery, sit down," my mother hissed. "Don't make a scene." "I'm not," I said, my voice calm and clear. It carried perfectly in the quiet, carpeted room. "I'd just like to say a few words. To in the spirit of healing. I turned to the room. Thank you, Mom, for that speech, and thank you all for coming. I looked at Aunt Nadia, at Uncle Jim. I'm sure you're all wondering why we're here, in a ballroom. I'm sure you all remember Mom's last party, the open house, when I also wasn't there. Avery, my father growled. I just think, I said, that healing requires truth, and forgiveness requires an apology, and I'm just a little confused. Mom, because I don't remember ever getting one. I looked around. I think you all deserve to know the internal details that we're supposed to be hiding. You see, the misunderstanding my mother mentioned was a phone call, exactly 1 year and 1 week ago, when she called to uninvite me from Thanksgiving, because my job, my hands, my life, were an embarrassment to her and to Lila. The room was dead silent. My mother's face was white. And the stress she's been under, I continued, is the stress of no longer having me as the family bank, as the family contractor, as the family shield. I pulled the single, folded piece of paper from my blazer pocket. I didn't have the manila envelope. I just had the paper. I am not your cancel culture, Mom. I am not a force. I am your daughter. I unfolded the paper, and for 15 years, I was also your employee, the unpaid one, the one you called when the furnace broke, for $9,000, the one you called when Lila's car was broken, for $2,000, the one you called when your house was in foreclosure, for almost $5,000, the one you called, and then the one you hid. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. My voice was a hammer. It was a fact. I am not your embarrassment, I said, my voice finally shaking, but not with sadness, with power. I am not your airbag. I am not your emergency contact, to be used and then put back in the glove box. I am a person, and you chose the image. You chose the facade. You chose the lie. Over me. I let the words hang. The room exploded in whispers. Aunt Nadia was just nodding, her arms crossed, a grim, satisfied look on her face. Uncle Jim was staring at my father with pure, undiluted contempt. Lila, who had reappeared, was standing by the wall, and she was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "Stop it, Avery," she whispered. "Stop it. Stop it. You're ruining everything." "This is performing, Avery," my father yelled, standing up. You're airing dirty laundry." "It's my laundry, Dad," I said. "You just made me carry it for 30 years. "She's not lying," a calm voice said. Graham. He was standing next to me. He hadn't planned to, but he was. "I was there," he said to the room. "I was in her apartment when they called her an embarrassment, and then, 5 minutes later, asked her for $4,000. I was there. It's the truth." My father looked like he was going to have a stroke. My mother was just openly sobbing, her face in her hands, her performance of a lifetime. And then, the moment that cut the last wire, a man at a table in the back stood up. He was a quiet, unassuming man in a cheap suit. He was one of Aunt Nadia's +1s, a man she'd been dating. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was professionally polite. "Ms. Bright?" Everyone turned. Who the hell was this guy? He looked at me. "My name is Arthur Chen. I'm a friend of Nadia's." "Avery," Aunt Nadia said, a small, wicked grin on her face. "Art isn't just a friend. He's a senior investigator at the city's Department of Buildings." My mother's sobbing stopped. My father's face went from purple to the color of ash. The investigator, Arthur, looked at me, and his face was all business. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I couldn't help but overhear. You just mentioned paying off a tax lien for Mercer property, and you also, I believe, mentioned your father using your name as an insurance policy for tenants." He pulled a small business card from his pocket. "I'm here as a guest tonight," he said, his eyes drilling into my father. "But, Ms. Bright, I would be very, very interested in having you come down to my office on Monday morning to talk about those internal details. Would you be willing to do that?" I looked at my father, I looked at my mother, their faces, a portrait of pure, unadulterated, catastrophic ruin. They had built this stage, they had sent the invitations, they had gathered the audience, and they had, finally, gotten the performance they deserved. I turned back to the investigator. I took the manila envelope out of my blazer. I handed it to him. "He's all yours, Mr. Chen," I said. "I'll be there on Monday, 8 a.m. sharp." That Monday morning, at 8 a.m. sharp, I walked into the offices of the Riverton Department of Buildings. It was a sterile, gray place, smelling of old paper and lukewarm coffee. But to me, it felt like a job site. I was shown to a small, windowless conference room. Arthur Chen, the investigator, was waiting for me. He was not in a cheap suit today. He was in his work clothes, a city logo polo shirt, and his face was all business. "Ms. Bright," he said, not smiling, just motioning for me to sit. "Thank you for coming. I want to be very clear. This is not a personal matter. This is a public safety investigation." "I understand," I said. I placed my file on the table, the one I had been building for a year. "I'm here as a master electrician, not as a daughter." "Good," he said, and he clicked his pen. For the next 2 hours, I did exactly what I had done at the Hudson Valley Galleria. I gave him the facts. I gave him the truth. I walked him through the file, showing him the dates and invoices for every single job I had ever done on my parents' primary residence. I showed him the furnace installation, the boiler replacement, the breaker swaps. Then, I showed him the void, the complete lack of any paperwork, any emails, any text messages, any invoices, related to Mercer Property Group. "I have never set foot on a single one of my father's rental properties," I said, my voice as steady as my hand. "I have never inspected, repaired, or signed off on any work he has done. The name Avery Bright does not exist in his commercial files. Anytime he used it, he was using it as a lie, a brand, not as a contractor." I gave him the printout of the email. "My daughter will handle it." "This," I said, "is how he used me, as a shield, as a way to stall tenants who were in active danger." Arthur Chen did not flinch. He just nodded, his face grim. "And these photos," he said, sliding a folder across the table. It was the same one Graham had shown me. The pennies in the fuse box, the scorched outlets. "Are these installations, in your professional opinion, up to code?" I looked at the photos, and the cold, pure rage came back. "Mr. Chen," I said, "these installations are not just out of code. They are attempted murder. This is not negligence. This is a bomb, waiting to go off. This is a landlord who is actively, consciously, choosing to let people die rather than spend $1,000 on a new panel." He nodded, a slow, subtle nod. "Thank you, Ms. Bright. That's all I need." I left his office. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt clean. I had filed my report. My revenge was not a plot. It was not a scheme. My revenge was simply the truth. My revenge was just a complete and total, itemized list of the facts. I had not embellished. I had not lied. I had just, for the first time, shown someone the entire schematic of my family's wiring, and I had let them, the professionals, decide if it was safe. The city, it turned out, agreed with my assessment. The investigation into Mercer Property Group was no longer a quiet, background hum. It was a siren. They shut down all 3 of his buildings on Division Street, citing imminent danger, and began a full-scale criminal probe. And that was when my phone started to ring. I had unblocked my parents' numbers, just out of a morbid curiosity. The voicemails were a masterclass in desperation. First, my father. You bitch. You did this. You went to the city. You are destroying your own father. You are nothing to me. You are trying to send me to jail. You will rot. You hear me? You?" I deleted it. 2 days later, my mother, this one was sobbing. Avery, baby, please, please, call them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were angry. You were just venting. You don't know what you've done. They're taking everything. Your father, he's a broken man. Please, Avery, I'm your mother. You're supposed to be the good one. You're supposed to be the stable one. Fix this. Please, Avery, I am begging you. Fix this. I deleted it. Then, of course, came Lila. She did not call. She went to the one place she felt safe. Instagram. She posted a black and white, artful photo of a single, wilting beige rose. The caption was a novel of self-pity. It's a strange and terrible new world we live in, where trauma is used as a weapon, and boundaries are just another word for cruelty. Be careful of those who claim to be victims but who are, in reality, the most toxic people in the room. Some people just want to burn the whole world down, even their own family, just to feel warm. #healing, #boundaries, #toxic, family, sadness, #moving on. It was a beautiful, vague, poetic performance. A year ago, her followers would have flooded the comments with "You're so strong" and "Stay brave, queen." But this time, the world had shifted. The first comment was from a username I didn't recognize. Toxic? Weren't you the one who was taking your dad's money while he was literally letting his tenants live in fire traps? That's not sadness. That's complicity. Another one. Be careful of those who claim to be victims. Is this about your sister? The electrician? The one your dad was using? You're not a victim. Lila, you're the one who was embarrassed by her. The comments kept coming, the narrative she had so carefully curated. Her entire authentic beige life was being dismantled, one comment at a time. This time, the followers were asking for accountability. They were not letting her hide. She had been vague-booked by the truth. I was sitting with Graham on a bench, overlooking the river. It was a cold, bright afternoon. We were just drinking coffee from paper cups, watching the ice float by. "They're going to lose the house," I said. It wasn't a question. "They already have," Graham said, his voice quiet. He didn't look at me. "The bank foreclosed. The investigation triggered a default on their mortgage. They're being evicted." "And the criminal charges?" "They're coming," he said. "Your father, for the properties. Your mother, for the finances. They were in it together. He was the negligence. She was the books. They're both liable." He finally turned to me. His eyes were kind. "You know this is not your fault, right, Avery?" "I know," I said, and I meant it. I don't know, I feel a little bit like I'm standing at the end of a job I just demolished." "You didn't," he said, and he put his hand on my shoulder, a solid, warm weight. "You didn't demolish anything. You stopped holding up the wall. You stepped aside, and the rotten, waterlogged, termite-eaten structure, it just did what rotten structures do. It fell down." He was right. I was not the wrecking ball. I was just the electrician who had finally, stopped resetting the breaker on a system that was designed to catch fire. The consequences came. Just as he said, my parents were forced to sell the Newberry house in a short sale, to pay a fraction of the fines. They moved into a small, rented apartment on the bad side of Riverton. A few of the relatives, the ones who had always been on the fence, quietly distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with a slumlord. I felt a strange, hollow sadness, not for them, but for the idea of them. I was sad for the ideal family that I had wanted as a kid, the one I had spent 31 years trying to fix, trying to earn my way into. I was grieving a fantasy, a house that had never actually existed. But underneath that sadness, there was a new foundation, a deep, quiet, solid peace, a sense of who I was, separate from what I could do for them. The next year, I did not wait for an invitation. I did not wonder what my family was doing. Thanksgiving came. The 3rd Street warehouse was booked solid before the end of October. People just knew. It wasn't an official event, it was just where you went. We called it the Table of the Uninvited. It was bigger, louder. We had more tables, more chairs. The new space heaters I'd bought were running on a dedicated circuit I'd installed myself. The families from the Division Street buildings were there, safe, in new, city-subsidized apartments. My apprentices were there, with their families. Ms. Evans, Mr. Petrov, Mike from the Union Hall, looking grumpy and holding a massive tray of dinner rolls. I stood on a folding chair to get everyone's attention. The room, for a second, went quiet. I looked out at all the faces, people who had been told, in one way or another, that they were too much or not enough. "Hey," I said, "thank you for coming." I raised my plastic cup of cider. I'm not going to make a long speech, but I just want to say, this table, this is for anyone who has ever been called a shame, for anyone who has ever been told they are a burden, for anyone who has ever been made to feel embarrassing. My voice was thick, but I kept going. You are not their shame. You are not their spare part. You are not their emergency backup system. You deserve a table. You deserve a seat at a table where you are wanted, not just tolerated, a table where you are chosen. So, I said, to the table of the uninvited, welcome, you're home. The applause was a low, deep, rolling thunder. It was warm. After the meal, as the noise level rose, I just watched. Maria's kids, the ones who had been so shy, were helping hang more string lights, making the room brighter. And the teens I had been teaching at the Wired Right workshops, they were there. A little group of them, my junior electricians, were huddled around one of the power strips for the coffee makers. Leo, the boy who had first carved the turkey, was showing the others how to use the cheap outlet tester I'd given him. "See," he was saying, deadly serious. "The 2 orange lights? That means the ground is good. Ms. Avery said you never plug in a high-load appliance without a good ground." They were checking my work, and I had never been prouder in my life. The night wound down. The families left, their arms full of leftovers, their kids asleep on their shoulders. At the end, it was just me and Graham, a sea of folding chairs, and a mountain of trash bags. "You're getting good at this," I said, as he neatly folded a chair. "I had a good teacher," he said, not looking at me. We worked in that comfortable, quiet rhythm, the sound of metal on metal, and the soft hum of the heaters. When the last chair was stacked, we stood under the glow of the string lights. "So," he said, his voice quiet, he was just looking at me, not as a case study, not as a victim, just as me. "You're pretty good at building tables, and you're good at building workshops, and you're good at building a sanctuary." He took a small step closer. "I was just wondering," he said, and his voice was so gentle, "if you'd ever be interested in building something else, together, no pressure, no deadline, just an invitation." I looked at him, this good, steady, honest man, the man who saw the code, who saw the line, just as clearly as I did. And I realized, for the first time, this was an invitation that had nothing to do with a broken furnace. It had nothing to do with my use. He was not inviting me to fix something. He was inviting me to be something with him. I smiled, a real, slow smile. I did not answer him right away. I let the moment breathe. I let the invitation be what it was, warm and safe, and finally, mine to accept. I walked out of the warehouse, and he walked with me. I locked the big metal door. I stood on the cold Riverton street, and I looked back. The warehouse was glowing. The string lights were on, a beacon of warm, bright light in the industrial darkness. It had been a storage space, a cold, empty box, and now it was a sanctuary. I knew, in that moment, that it did not matter what my parents ever did again. It did not matter if they went to jail or if they tried to call, or if they ever even thought of me. They no longer had any power here. They did not control the grid. I had cut the power to their illusion, to their facade, to their control. On the exact day they decided to uninvite me from their table, and when their perfect, curated world finally blacked out, I was still standing. I was standing in a brighter place, a place I had built myself, a place where everyone knew my name, not as a tool, not as a shame, but as Avery Bright, the electrician. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so glad I could share it with you. I'm curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let's connect. Share your own thoughts. Please, if you enjoyed this, subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us your support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.